I arrived at the holiday brunch with my kids shaking snow from their coats, hoping foolishly that this year might feel different. The room went quiet the moment we stepped in, like we dragged a storm behind us. My dad glanced up from his seat, eyes narrowing with that familiar mix of annoyance and judgment. I didn't understand why the air shifted, why every smile dimmed until he opened his mouth and shattered the morning. Before I tell you the rest, tell me, where are you listening from? And when you hear what happened next, ask yourself, what would you have done, Mikey? My name is Audrey, and if you'd seen us walking into that Denver brunch spot that morning, you might have thought we were just another family trying to squeeze in some holiday peace. I held my kids' hands, pretending not to notice how their fingers tightened the closer we got to the table. They've learned to read a room the way other kids read comic books, quietly, quickly bracing for the shift they know is coming. Growing up, my family never needed to raise their voices to make me feel out of place. It happened in smaller ways. My father's sigh when I entered the room, the way conversations closed like doors, the polite smiles that didn't reach anyone's eyes. For years, I told myself it was all in my head. But becoming a mother changes how you see things. You stop making excuses for adults who should know better. Holiday gatherings were always the hardest. My dad's side of the family loved spectacle big centerpieces, coordinated outfits, loud toasts that hid sharper truths. I used to show up trying to blend in, hoping someone would notice the effort. But the older I got, the more I realized their warmth had borders, and I lived permanently outside the fence. This brunch was supposed to be simple. I'd made cinnamon rolls at dawn, packed extra gloves, rehearsed gentle reminders with the kids about being polite. I wanted them to feel included, even if I didn't. When we walked in, I saw my dad sitting near the head of the table, laughing at something my cousin said. For a moment, I let myself believe this year could be different, that maybe the coldness I'd felt for so long was just memory stretching itself into the present. But the signs arrived early, subtle as ever. My mom's eyes widened when she saw me, like I'd walked into the wrong event. She recovered fast, pasting on a smile and squeezing my arm with fingers stiff enough to bruise. My aunt waved awkwardly, barely nudging a chair over for my daughter. Conversation slowed around us, then picked up again, but with a tone I knew all too well. A tone that said I shouldn't have come without ever using the words. My kids, bless them, tried. My son showed his little sister how to fold the paper napkin into a triangle, whispering jokes to make her giggle. I sat there pretending everything was normal, sipping water that tasted like metal, praying my dad wouldn't notice how hard I was trying to disappear. But of course he noticed. He always did. And instead of looking relieved to see his grandkids, he looked inconvenienced. Like our presence threw off the picture he wanted the world to see. Still, I stayed polite. I helped my daughter reach the fruit bowl, asked my mom how her week was, even passed the butter to my dad despite the way he avoided my eyes. I thought if I kept trying, maybe the ice would crack. I was wrong, and the next words out of his mouth would prove it. The shift started with something as small as a laugh, one of those clipped, practiced ones my dad used when he wanted the room's attention. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his fork against his glass, not enough to make a scene, but enough to send a message. Conversation softened, heads angled. Even my kids paused. I was cutting my daughter's waffle into pieces when I felt it, a stare that burned hotter than the steam rising off the food. I looked up, and there he was. My dad eyes locked on me with a tight smile that never reached his cheeks. A smile I'd grown up mistaking for patience, only to learn later it was irritation dressed up in politeness. "Everything okay?" I asked quietly, trying to keep things from unraveling too soon. He dragged his eyes over my coat draped behind me, the kids' gloves drying on the back of a chair, the little mess that comes with having children, and then back to me. The smirk started slow curling just enough that my stomach dropped. "This was meant to be a nice day," he said loud enough for the two tables beside us to hear. "Why did you come?" The room didn't fall silent. It froze. My aunt's hand hovered over the syrup bottle. My cousin's husband stopped mid-bite. Even the waitress who had been refilling coffee seemed to hesitate like she'd stepped into a family landmine. I felt the words hit me before my brain could process them. They slammed against years of smaller cuts, comments about how I made things, heavy jokes about how I never quite fit, remarks about how the kids were a handful. But this was the first time he'd said it so cleanly, so openly, so deliberately. "Why did you come?" My throat tightened around air. I blinked once, twice trying not to cry in front of my children. A familiar heat spread up my neck, the kind that came from being humiliated in public. I opened my mouth, hoping to say something measured, something that wouldn't pour gasoline on the table, but nothing came out. My mom looked down, pretending to rearrange the silverware. My brother cleared his throat, but said nothing. No one stepped in. No one ever did. The kids were the only ones who noticed the danger. They always sensed it before the adults admitted it. My son straightened in his chair, eyes flicking between me and his grandfather, the confusion on his face sharper than any insult my dad could throw. He whispered, barely audible over the clinking dishes, "Mom, why is he mad?" I swallowed, forcing my breathing steady. "He's not mad," I lied, though every inch of me was shaking. My dad scoffed, one short mocking sound, and that was it, the moment the ground fully cracked beneath us. My son leaned closer, voice fragile. "Should we leave?" His question sliced through the air heavier than my father's insult. It wasn't just concern, it was fear, and that fear wasn't mine to swallow anymore. I looked at my boy, then at my daughter, tugging at her napkin, trying to make herself small. In that instant, the years of excuses, of hoping for change, of shrinking myself for the sake of peace, every bit of it collapsed. And for the first time in a long time, something inside me stood up straighter. What I said next would change everything. I didn't answer my son right away. I couldn't. My heart was pounding so loudly it felt like the entire restaurant could hear it. The brunch chatter around us slowly crept back to life, people pretending not to stare while doing a terrible job of hiding it. My father had already returned to his plate, acting as though he hadn't just carved me out of the morning like fat from a roast. My son's hand slipped into mine again, smaller, tighter. "Mom," he whispered, "please." That single word, please, wasn't about embarrassment. It was about protection. My kids had spent years watching me fold myself in half to fit inside this family's narrow definition of acceptable. They'd seen enough to know when the line had been crossed, even if they couldn't name it. I drew in a breath that shook in my chest. The air smelled like burnt butter and maple syrup, but underneath it, disappointment. Old familiar disappointment I'd swallowed since childhood. I was so tired of the taste. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the tile, cutting through the brunch noise like a blade. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. My daughter looked up at me with wide eyes, cereal spoon, frozen midair. "Yes," I said finally. "Right now." My dad didn't even look up. That hurt more than the smirk. Ignorance as dismissal. Erasure disguised as indifference. If he had yelled, it would have meant I mattered enough to provoke him. Silence told a deeper truth. He believed I was beneath reaction. I stood helping my daughter into her coat, looping her scarf gently so she wouldn't feel rushed. My son grabbed his gloves, jaw clenched in a maturity he shouldn't need yet. I could feel every gaze on us, some pitying, some curious, a few relieved. It wasn't their family falling apart on a holiday morning. My mom reached out like she might say something, but her hand stalled midway, fingers curling back into her palm. A lifetime of standing beside my dad kept her silent. She couldn't step toward me without stepping away from him, and she had never chosen me before, so I didn't wait. We walked out together, the three of us, the door swinging shut behind us with a soft thud that felt far louder in my chest. Outside, the cold wrapped around us instantly, but the air felt cleaner, sharp, honest, free of performance. My son slipped his hand into mine again. "Good job, Mom," he murmured. I hadn't earned that praise yet, but I would. An hour later, my dad would regret every word he'd said. An hour later, my dad regretted his words. It didn't happen with shouting or plates breaking or some dramatic scene straight out of a soap opera. It began with something much quieter, a shift no one could ignore. The kids and I had gone back to my place, a small apartment overlooking one of those Denver streets where the snow piles up in the corners like dirty cotton. I made hot chocolate the way they liked it too much, whipped cream cinnamon on top, trying to warm something deeper than our hands. I thought that would be the end of it. Another wound I'd learned to live with. Another story my kids would carry even when they tried not to. But then my phone buzzed. It was my mom. Not a call she wouldn't risk my dad hearing her voice soften. A message. Something happened. I think you should know. Before I could respond, another notification appeared, this time from my aunt, then my cousin, then my brother's wife. All versions of the same thing: he messed up. I stared at the messages, confused, until the pieces started falling into place. When we left the restaurant, my dad tried to spin the story to frame my departure as overreacting or dramatic. He expected his usual audience of nodding heads, but people had seen the whole exchange. They heard every word, and for the first time in a long time, no one was willing to pretend otherwise. My aunt, who'd always kept quiet to avoid conflict, finally spoke up. She told him she was embarrassed for him, embarrassed that his grandkids watched him belittle their mother. My cousin's husband, who barely talks, said my father's behavior was cruel, not cranky. The waitress even chimed in. She'd overheard. She'd seen everything. And apparently she told the table that she couldn't imagine speaking to her own daughter that way. I pictured my dad sitting there, his authority slipping through his hands like melting ice, and for once, he had no one left to perform for. No script, no control. But the real turning point wasn't the comments. It was what happened next. While the family confronted him, the restaurant manager approached their table holding a folder of itemized charges, things my dad had put under a prepaid arrangement. Holiday Brunch was expensive, and he'd taken pride in covering everything. Except he hadn't. His card had declined. Twice. He tried another, declined again. The manager, in a calm but firm tone, asked if someone else at the table could settle the bill. The entire extended family, the same people he'd tried to impress, watched his face turn the kind of shade that even Colorado winter couldn't explain. My mom, flustered and teary, had to pull out her own card to cover the charges. My dad snapped at her under his breath, but the words didn't matter anymore. The room had already seen the truth. The man who cared so deeply about appearances couldn't hold up the illusion. That was the moment. That was the hour he regretted everything. Not because he'd hurt me, not because he'd embarrassed my kids, but because losing control in public was the one humiliation he'd never forgiven anyone else for. My phone buzzed again. A new message. From him. Just 2 words. Come back. Not an apology. Not even a request. A command, reflexive, instinctive, the way he'd spoken to me my whole life. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. My finger hovered for a second, then tapped voice call. If he wanted to talk, he could hear my voice steady and clear. He picked up immediately. "Audrey, this is ridiculous. People are making a big deal out of nothing. Just come back." "No," I said. Silence. Not the heavy kind. The stunned kind. Like he couldn't process a word that simple. That final. "No," he repeated. I pictured him gripping the phone, jaw tight, waiting for the obedient version of me to reappear, the one who bent instead of broke. I didn't give him that. "You embarrassed me in front of my children," I said softly, "in a room full of people, and you've done it for years. I'm done pretending it's normal." He inhaled sharply. "Audrey, you're twisting. No, I'm not twisting anything. For once I'm telling the truth without cushioning it to protect your ego." Another silence. A longer one. I continued. "My kids deserve better, and so do I. We're not coming back. You're ruining this family," he snapped. I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my chest for decades. "This family was ruined because no one ever held you accountable," I said. "Today wasn't about me showing up. It was about you showing who you really are." He didn't respond. Maybe because there was nothing left to say. Maybe because he finally understood that the control he held so tightly was gone. Maybe for the first time he saw the cost of his own words. I hung up before he could recover his footing. Behind me, my son was watching, wide-eyed but steady. "Was that Grandpa?" he asked. "Yes," I said, kneeling to meet his gaze. "And we're okay." "Good," he whispered, "because he made you sad. Kids don't need long explanations. They just need the truth. And the truth was simple." Leaving wasn't weakness. It was the first boundary I'd ever set. That night, as the city lights flickered across our windows, I felt something shift, the beginning of peace. Small, but real. And before we turned in for the night, I told my kids something I should have told myself years ago. Love shouldn't make you feel small. If you want more stories like this, real stories about standing up, speaking out, and reclaiming your place, support us on Flex Revenge by subscribing. You'll get notified the moment a new story goes live. The next morning, Denver was quiet, the kind of winter calm that makes everything feel softer, even the things that still hurt. I made breakfast, while the kids argued playfully over who got the bigger pancake, their laughter filling the space that used to feel too empty after family gatherings. For once, there was no tightness in my chest, no rehearsed explanations for why someone had treated me poorly. My phone buzzed a few times throughout the day, my mom checking in, my aunt apologizing for not speaking up sooner, a cousin sending a heart emoji and nothing else, but not a single message from my dad. And strangely, that silence felt like closure rather than punishment. In the afternoon, I drove the kids to a small park near our building. We walked along the icy path while they kicked snow into the air, their joy so bright it made the sting of yesterday feel like it belonged to someone else. I realized then that leaving the brunch wasn't just about protecting them from humiliation. It was about choosing a life where their mother stood tall, not folded. We walked home hand in hand, lighter, freer, finally ours. That night, after the kids fell asleep, I sat by the window and let the quiet settle. Walking away hadn't broken my family. It had finally stopped them from breaking me. Sometimes love means drawing a line even when it shocks everyone on the other side of it. If this story feels familiar, if you've ever had to choose your own peace, share your experience below. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next story.